I was just listening to this beautiful masterclass by Joyce DiDonato, this incredible opera singer. And she said her first years as a professional, and she was living the dream, quote unquote, she said that she was always where she wasn't. And I think a lot of musicians on the road can feel that way, especially with social media. I mean, when I started touring, we didn't have it. I remember when Facebook came and we could see what everyone else was doing. And then that sort of fear of missing out, or where should I be? Or I'm not doing that gig. I'm not playing with that person. I missed that show. I missed a birthday. Someone's sick. I can't be there. And so you're always zipping around the world at all the places that you aren't. And the way she put it was, that's like driving in the city and running errands all the time and zipping back and forth and da-da. But what you want to be is this highway driving where you're in one place, you're present, and wherever you are, that's where you are. And so when you're on the road, you're happy, you're having those experiences. And when you're home, and you're not thinking about where you could be or what you're not doing.
This is the Conscious Economics Podcast, and I'm your host, Rhiannon Roseland. This is the place where we explore people, planet, profit, and art through the lens of the new economy. If you're interested in changing yourself, getting more creative, or changing the system at large, then this is the podcast for you. Tune in every other week as we explore these topics with amazing guests. We'll go deep, we'll go heart-centered and soul-felt as we go into how we change ourselves and change the world. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm so glad you're back, and we have another amazing episode for you today. This conversation went really deep with Miranda Mulholland. Miranda is a great friend of mine and of Conscious Economics. I met her years ago when I was still the CEO of the Economic Club of Canada, and she was the first ever artist to take the podium. And I remember watching her speak that day, and her incredible activism and advocacy for music workers in Canada and around the world. And she literally sent a chill just down my spine. She's such a special human, such a special woman, and I'm so excited for you to hear from her today. More formally, she's a classically trained violinist and singer, and has been nominated for Juno Awards as a fiddler and a singer, covering a wide range of styles. She's also the founder and artistic director of the Muskoka Music Festival. She's been in some incredible bands, and she's also done a lot of incredible solo work as well. She started her own record label, Roaring Girl Records, which has a reputation as a home for diverse and excellent artists, which is pretty awesome as well. And then she has all of her incredible advocacy work that she's done. So over the past 4 years, Miranda has emerged as one of the world's foremost artist activists and advocates. She was invited to speak at the WTO, the WIPO, the USMCA, negotiating round in Washington, a CMW, the Banff World Media Festival, the Artist Rights Symposium at the University of Georgia, and so many more. She also currently holds the position of Creative Culture Advisor at Music Canada. So she acts as a connector and a bridge between artists and commerce. And she is also currently the vice chair of the Board of Governors at Massey Roy Thompson Hall, and is the chair of the Music Canada Advisory Council. Miranda is a joy, a gem, and I know you are going to love this episode. So sink in, get comfortable, and have fun. Hi, Miranda.
Hi, Rhiannon.
I'm so excited to have you here. It's such an honor and a pleasure. I want to start off by just sharing with you why I found it so important to have you be on the podcast, just to anchor you into the space for a moment. So this podcast has really evolved over the last couple of seasons, and it's really been about bringing conscious economy, new economy leaders onto the show to tell their own unique stories and to share their own wisdom. And for me, you are 100% one of those inspiring new economy economy leaders. I remember the first time that I ever saw you, met you. It was at one of the old economic club events, and you got up and just did like a closing remark. And I was floored by you, by your presence, by you as, an artist and a musician, but also as an activist and advocate. And I immediately just felt an energy of wanting to connect with you. And we've been able to do that and share so many different opportunities and spaces together since. Whenever I see you, I feel like I'm amongst a sister, someone that, I don't need to be with you and be involved in your life in every aspect, but I know that you're on a particular vibration that I recognize, and I'm grateful that it's in the world. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. And I say all of that mirrored right back at you. I mean, it's so great to find those people in the world that we can make that magic and then put it out in the world for others to respond to too.
100%. So I want to get started in really understanding you and your story in becoming an artist and a musician, because I know so many people that have that dream and have the talent, but for whatever reason become too afraid to pursue that dream because of all kinds of things. But society is not always so warm or kind to us when we want to pursue our artistry. So my question really starts off in, how did you decide to follow your heart and create such an epic career for yourself in music?
I think I have to acknowledge just also the extreme privilege that I had as a kid having private music lessons. My parents are not musicians, but they're huge appreciators of music. They love classical music especially, and my brother played violin. And I'm very competitive, so I wanted to play too, and I wanted to be better. so I, that was sort of my first impetus was wanting to, beat my brother at something. So I sort of fell into that. But obviously, my very first lesson, there was a car outside that honked, and I said, "This sounds like this," and I knew exactly what note it was on the violin and played the same honk on my fiddle, my tiny little fiddle. And what I think one of the things that I did recognize growing up and having my lessons and violin and then switching to singing, being in choirs, having all those opportunities afforded to me, that there was a real privilege there. So part of the reason that I could been able to follow my dreams was I saw that it was a possibility, and I was given the tools to make it so. So I think that was a huge part of it. And also, I was always a really precocious kid and very curious and really independent. So my parents had a letter one day when I was a teenager, and they said, "Who is this from? It's to you, but it looks really fancy, and it's from Toronto." And it was from Ed Mirvish, because I'd written to him to find out when the auditions were for Les Miserables. I wanted to be young Cosette. And so I'd written to the owner of the Royal Alexandra Theatre.
Of course you did, Miranda.
And he wrote me a very sweet letter back and put me in touch with somebody who was in charge of the auditions. And in the end, I convinced my parents to take me in and do that. It was the only time in my whole life that I was too tall for something, and I was cut down at the very last hurdle. But, I don't see that as a failure. I just sort of see that as an indication of a very precocious kid who knows what she wants. And so I think I owe a lot of my career to being that little girl.
I love that you just said that, and that it's your inner child. It's that inner little girl, which is still so present, because as you tell that story, I'm like, of course you did. Like you would do that right now. Like you have done that. You've made a career of doing these things, of being like, I'll write them a letter. I'm going to ask for what we need, which is just so your spunky, fiery personality that you have. And I love it so much. That's such a great story.
Isn't it sort of just a balance too of having that fearlessness to go after something that you want? And then, you say you can see that in me. And I have to keep reminding myself of that fearlessness as a kid and going, of course I'm going to write to Ed Mirvish. Like, why wouldn't I? And then having the other balance of what's my value in the world? What's my worth? And as we get older, we're constantly up against that part of it. So I feel as though getting older and just growing up is trying to appease the balance of what am I worth and having those doubts, and then going back to, I am worth this. Of course I can ask be fearless in that spot.
Well, I mean, I think again, what I'm hearing you say is that as the years go on, the conditioning of society and the pressure and media and all of these things start telling us this other story of what we are. But when we're born and as little children and as we grow up, we're not fully conditioned by those things yet. So our true essence shines through. And so I think for me, my recovery of self, or becoming myself again, is really this melting away of all of the parts that I'm not, that I took on because I always knew who I was. We all are sort of start out that way, and then it's what kind of gets layered on over top. So it's a beautiful coming back to oneself, I think, that process.
100%. It's so funny. I was just reading this great book by Jeanette Winterson, who's an incredible author. And she talks about art as being that dismantler. So every day, all around us, we are reconditioning ourselves to who we think we are. And great art, no matter what that is, and I don't mean that as a conditional thing, as in I'm deciding or some critics deciding, but whatever you see as art is something that you look at that dismantles what you think about yourself. And then you have to confront that and then have a response to it. And I love that so much. I think the world of Jeanette, I've paraphrased that so poorly when you compare to how she speaks that. But, I love that idea.
I love that as well. And this is something that I also feel in just being a voyeur of you and watching your life. And obviously you're a performer and an artist and, an activist and all of these pieces that we're going to get into. But I really do find that you live your life as art. Like your whole life is art to me, even just looking at where you sit and like your home and the way you drink tea and all of the things, like every piece of the way that you present yourself is with this flavor and essence of you. So is that something that's conscious for you? Like, how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, I think it probably started a little unconsciously, just being on the road so much. So you're always in flux. So then what is it that you can keep around yourself in your orbit that gives you joy, that gives you senses of you? And then throughout my 20s and 30s, while I was traveling so often, I'd come home to my little apartment in Toronto. I used to live in this if you could picture, if I was a Barbie, you would picture this. It was sort of I lived in a garret, like the third floor of a house, big back deck, crooked walls, with the slopey ceilings. And I made it into this sort of Aladdin's cave of things that brought me joy, including books. And books have always moved with me, that people always say to divest yourself of books, and they can do that. But I prefer to have them around me because they remind me of where I was, and you can always pick up a book and you're different. It's different. The way you respond to it's different. But in that same sense of living with art. And then my parents are huge fans of William Morris and that arts and crafts movement of the late 1800s in England, which was, surround yourself with things that are useful or beautiful. And that's kind of become my mantra. I don't know, not specifically, I don't have it written on a on a plate somewhere in the house, but I do have it in my fingertips, when I'm picking things to be around me. Because why not? Why not surround yourself with beautiful, useful things?
I love that. I love that so much. And what is your connection to, I feel like there's like a essence of antiquity in you. There's like, the antique, the classic. There's just this essence that comes through in you and your music. What is that lineage, or where does that come from? And are you conscious of that as well?
That's an interesting question. I think that's more about me being a bit of a magpie and finding shiny things wherever I see them and collecting them. So as a collector, as a curator, I know that word got very overused in the past decade, but I love it. And the idea of, you can't call yourself necessarily a Renaissance woman, but you can aspire to be one. And so that's something I aspire to be. And I think that just belies a curiosity about all kinds of things. And so, a collector of interesting friends, of ideas, of beautiful furniture. I do also love this idea that the river you step in isn't the river you stand in, et cetera. And to have in my house, things that belonged to my Nana that she loved very much, my grandparents, both of them, and both sets, and things that have been given to me that it is sort of that timelessness. They will keep existing after I'm gone, and maybe someone else will love them as I do. But I think that magpie collector, curator essence definitely plays in my music. I pick and choose things. I love opera. I love jazz. I love folk music, classical. So it all sort of shows up somewhere.
I love it. I love it. I love to spend time in your energy because I feel like on one side, you are so on the pointy edge of progress and you are taking us to this new space and place in the way that you occupy your own space as a woman. And then you also hold this energy of where the root is, where the classic is, where the lineage and what we don't want to rid ourselves of because it's part of the essence of how we got here to be able to be progressing as we do. So you embody it so elegantly and it comes through in all of your work to me, whether it's your activism, whether it's your music, whether it's just how you curate yourself or how you share parts of your wisdom or teaching even on social media. So it's a beautiful thing and another thing I love about you. And as we were just talking, you talked about creating this sense of home when you're on the road. And this is where I'd love to take the next part of our conversation. At Conscious Economics and at Lunar Studios, we've been really, really focused on the experience of music workers and touring musicians and the real toll it takes to do that work, especially as the industry has changed. And, you know, now it's really all about touring. And even that post-COVID has its own new challenges and layers. So in terms of wellness and mental health, how have you been able to manage yourself as a woman, as a being living in a world and with a career that demands so much of you and so much, you know, away or not being rooted in that beautiful space that you call home?
Well, I spent 20 years of my life on the road and I mean sort of 50-50. So yeah, I guess over a course of 2 decades, that's a whole decade of being not home. And I started out not really understanding about how to advocate for myself. I think musicians historically have been, you know, at a place where you want the gigs and you know that someone will do it for less. And so you end up sacrificing some of your own personal comfort. It's an erosion process. I think it doesn't always start that way, but it can happen really, really quickly. And it's such a slippery slope. And you know, I wasted time, I wasted energy, I wasted effort, and a lot of things that didn't serve me, and the toll was high. I don't think I even fully understood how hard it was to be in that lifestyle for 20 years until I stopped. And I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who feel the same way that, you know, in 2020 to have a stop and to have that sense of everything that has been chasing you or that you've been running from to catch up with you and then settle. You know, it took a really long time. I'm still not sure that I have worked my way through kind of what the effects on my body were for that much hustle and that much being unsure and, you know, quicksand that you have to sort of occupy. But again, I also honor that because it taught me a lot about what is valuable, and it allowed me to learn to advocate for myself. You know, and the one of the biggest times, you know, it's hard being the only woman in a band, and that was my role very many times on the road. Just for many reasons, you know, you don't have an ally, you don't have someone who understands certain things about just your life. And I had good people around me too. I mean, I'm not being disparaging about my bandmates because sometimes they don't know what you don't know about someone else's experience. And I did go at one point and I wanted my own room on the road because it was so taxing. And also I felt it was disrespectful to the wives of some of my bandmates who perhaps weren't that comfortable either. But, you know, it painted me into that classic female thing, which was then I was a problem because I was more expensive to bring on the road. And, you know, I understood it at the time as well. I mean, margins are tight and it's really hard. But it was a real sort of lesson of, oh, okay, well, I guess if I'm too expensive, then maybe this isn't the place for me. and I need to make other arrangements. But in that no and in that understanding, it brought me to people who did think I was worth that investment and wanted to have that, and also gave me the impetus to start things on my own, to create a space where others would feel comfortable, where I was valued, where they were valued. So like any no, it can be jujitsu'd into a yes and that was a real lesson. Now at the ripe old age of 43, I do have a kind of a metric that I use for opportunities. I think so what's sort of the rule of 3? It has to be 2 out of 3. It's good people, good music, or good pay. And 2 out of 3 should be covered. Hopefully 3 out of 3 in the best case scenario. But just so you're happy to have made that decision to join and be there. I think it's really important. And I wish I'd known earlier that saying no to things doesn't always shut down things. It actually opens better possibilities. And it's such a hard lesson in the world of scarcity, but it has been extremely true.
It absolutely is. And it resonates with me in my own way as an entrepreneur. And, if you're not bringing in the next deal or the next piece of business, or in my case, the next event, then, you're not eating and you're not feeding the people that rely on you. And so it's that same feeling of, do you have to say yes to everything? And it's moving out of that scarcity mindset and realizing that as you uphold your own value system and you do the things that are aligned to you, those better opportunities can have space. If we're too full in doing all the things that we have to do, and I'm putting up air quotes, we don't get to do the things we want to do sometimes, which is so interesting. When you talk about coming off the road after 20 years, and you mentioned this feeling or sensation in your body and just like everything kind of catching up to you, can you speak a little bit more specifically to that experience? Because I think a lot of artists in our community, and even myself in the live events industry, having a similar experience of everything halting, because in my own way, I was doing a pop-up road show of events on the road and doing a similar sort of a lifestyle that way. I'd love for you to just articulate what that really felt like and what you've been able to discern through that experience, because I think it'll be helpful for our audience.
Yeah, of course. I think one thing that you're taught in that cycle mindset, and same with your events, Rhiannon, too, because when you're presenting all the time, where's the time for a fallow field where you can plant seeds and then just have a moment to watch them grow and make changes to the atmosphere? But in that way of always moving, always getting somewhere, next gig, next day, next tour, what's happening after when I get home, what bills am I paying, who am I going to see, that adds up to a place where you can't listen to your body, because if you did, it'd be like Roadrunner over the gorge, and you would look down and fall because you wouldn't have anything to stand on. And so I think what stopping made me do was confront that, my body has been telling me things that I have been ignoring for years. And that could be going to the dentist, that could be stretching, that could be sitting still. I think a lot of my friends and colleagues who have had that similar thing have a hard time just sitting in a moment, because when do we ever do that? When you're in a van, but you're always, where am I going? And I think the biggest lesson on that too, and I'll get back to the body in a second, because I think that's really important. But mentally, I was just listening to this beautiful masterclass by Joyce DiDonato, this incredible opera singer. And she said her first years as a professional, and she was living the dream, quote unquote, she said that she was always where she wasn't. And I think a lot of musicians on the road can feel that way, especially with social media. I mean, when I started touring, we didn't have it. I remember when Facebook came and we could see what everyone else was doing. And then that sort of fear of missing out, or where should I be? Or I'm not doing that gig. I'm not playing with that person. I missed that show. I missed a birthday. Someone's sick. I can't be there. And so you're always zipping around the world at all the places that you aren't. And the way she put it was, that's like driving in the city and running errands all the time and zipping back and forth and But what you want to be is this highway driving where you're in one place, you're present. And And wherever you are, that's where you are. And so when you're on the road, you're happy, you're having those experiences. And when when you're home and you're not thinking about where you could be or what you're not doing. And I think what the stopping showed me was, I was doing a lot more of the city driving and wondering what I wasn't doing and who I wasn't talking to, and to have to sit in a really awkward position like we all did during that time, having to sit in that really uncomfortable part. It's like in yoga where you go into that, you're holding a position and it's crunchy and it doesn't feel good, but that's where the work happens. And so I think that being still was a real indication. And I think we don't listen to our bodies enough, even just making decisions. And I don't know if you felt this way about some events or things that you had a twinge and then you ignored it because for whatever reason you felt you had to go through. And I'm trying to be a lot more careful. And look, I'm learning. I learn every day and I relearn every day. I'm like, I learned this before? But to be really careful about what my body's telling me. I had a really visceral experience during the pandemic when we did one online show. And, they were horrible. I mean, I didn't see, everyone tried their best. Bless everyone. But it was, what a time. But I performed one online live thing. And it was so unsatisfying. I was physically ill afterwards because you're just performing in this vacuum to nobody. And there was no feedback and there was the ephemera, the thing that I love the most about performing wasn't there. And I just thought, what is the point of this? I can't do what I love. And, so I think I listened to my body that time. And when I was asked again, I just thought, absolutely not. I won't be participating in any more of these until I can do what I love to do the way I love to do it. I can't.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I know how deep it runs. And I had my own experience of I was not okay when everything stopped because I had been going at a pace that was so ridiculous and so not normal or nourishing that my whole nervous system was so revved up, so high and so cranked that to actually come down off of that. And we hear stories all the time about ignoring certain signals in the body and all of those things. But I felt like something was deeply wrong with me. I felt like the deep dissatisfaction with being with myself. And it was very confronting and very difficult. And I felt that I couldn't even attune myself to my children. And I was like, what am I going to do? And it was a real process of slowly unraveling whatever that was. And by the end of it, actually deeply appreciating the space and the rest. And I know that that was something, and again, I speak intersectionally and we all had different experiences of what we could or couldn't do. But for me, there was a moment where something relaxed for the first time inside of my being, maybe ever. So that was, it was just very profound. And then it's interesting that we watch now trying to rev back up and what that feels like and how my body kind of won't. It just won't do it anymore. It's like, come on. It's like pulling one of those old lawnmowers and and it's not starting. And I'm like, oh shit, I wrecked myself because I'm too in tune now with knowing what I can and cannot do. And that kind of leads me to my next question. So obviously a label owner, you've started an incredible festival. You're an incredibly seasoned, talented musician, both in your band and then you've done your solo stuff. But you have also become a very prolific global advocate for musicians and music workers. And this is how I met you in that particular, vein. You were the first artist to ever address the Economic Club of Canada nationally on behalf of artists and music workers. So my question to you is, how did that become a part of your life and experience? And what is it that you've learned through that? What is it that you're advocating for?
Great question. And then, part of my brain spins on that. I wanted to jump on one thing you said about revving back up because that resonates with me so much. And now as I'm performing again, my first show back, as a solo performer, I've got this new project. I woke up in the morning and I felt quite ill. And I thought, oh, listening to my body, what is it saying? And then it turned out that one thing that's happened, and maybe this is also speaks to your experience, my body thinks that excitement is all of that adrenaline and anxiety. And so it's sort of miscommunicating and crossing the wires a little bit, because it sees the heart rate accelerate. It sees those, endorphins, it sees all these things that are happening. And then it goes, whoa, we talked about this. You got to slow down. And so now it's been a weird kind of, it's like having a red and a black wire entwined, and just taking them apart and realizing, okay, this is the bad anxiety and this is the good excitement. And we have to separate. So I just wanted to touch on that, because that's been my latest challenge of figuring out, and there are things like beta blockers. I eat a banana. I mean, there's funny things you can do to sort of lower the one so that you can see the other one better.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like I'm in one of those Mission Impossible movies and just trying to cut the right wire. But that's been definitely my experience of revving back up.
Oh, that's so helpful to know. And it's something we're working on a program right now that literally is about, some biohacking and mindfulness tools for artists, because it's a very real experience. You are, and it's similar to being in the live event space, because you're going into an adrenaline space where you're revving up, you're speaking to an audience, you're giving out this energy, and there's, a revving up, and then there's a coming down that has to happen. And there's natural ways that we can support our bodies through that process. We just need to know what they are. So we are working on releasing a really cool 6-part educational series around basically biohacking for touring musicians. So I'm going to have to get your feedback on some of that, but I love that you just said that.
Fascinated.
Yeah.
I'm so curious.
Yeah.
That's exciting. Well, I think I can segue into the sort of civic action and advocacy piece from that. But, it goes back to this little girl who wants to tell stories and share and be precocious and talk to who's making change around here. Is it Ed Mirvish? Is it the Prime Minister? I want to make sure. I have a lot of love in my heart for little me, but, I can imagine some of my schoolmates, but I was captain of the safety patrol. I had this sort of justice in me, like sit down, face the front. So I do have love for a little captain of the safety patrols. But there was sort of always that idea of, if you can tell people why and you can explain it to people and they can share your feeling, then you can make change. You can buy an acre of the rainforest. That was one of the first things I wanted to do as a kid. And we stop acid rain, if you remember all of the different things that were in our zeitgeist at the time. And, I was the first one to campaign that brownies you should be able to wear pants and not the little dress if you wanted, because it's chilly in the winter. So I sort of had that, that bent, I guess, of going, this needs to change. Let's go to whoever can change this. But becoming an artist, looking around and being a working musician and understanding, for so long, I just thought, well, this is the way it is, and I guess I do this. But then understanding that, oh, wait, there are levers that can be shifted. And people, if they understand what the problem is, it's not there, I don't think that there's an ill will trying to keep people, there's some big conspiracy. I just honestly think people are doing the best they can and they don't know. And so much of the time, policies that affect artists, affect anyone really, they're not at the table to talk about it. And I think that's a crying shame, especially for artists, only because artists are such great storytellers and would make fabulous lobbyists. And so if they could get at the table and have those seats and be able to speak their truth, then, we could influence policymakers, and that can help and change. And so becoming more civic minded on that, I joined the Toronto Music Advisory Council. I applied. I had to go through a rigorous process to get on that, really prove myself. And, it was scary to be in that room for the very first time and be one of the youngest people and one of the only women and one of the only artists. And to speak up and say, the first thing I think that was said was, we want a music-friendly city. And I said, music-friendly city isn't the same as a musician-friendly city. You can call something a music city all you want, but if there isn't affordable housing, if there isn't transportation for a time that after a gig, if there isn't parking for musicians to load in and out, some of them are simple fixes, some of them are a lot more baked into other policies as well in different departments. But just starting to see that, people listened. And, a few people listened. Graham Henderson was the first person. He was the CEO of Music Canada at the time. And he was the first person who said, "You're absolutely right. I want to know more about what you think." And that was a real validation for me to have somebody, who I perceived as one of them. And then realizing, no, we are in us. We're in us, all of us. And I have a responsibility as somebody who has thoughts on this to talk about it. And so just challenging the notion too that artists shouldn't be, or they don't want to be, or, they just want to go over there and create. No, let's give role models for people who do want to make change and do want to be at the table. There's a historic infantilization of artists saying they don't know what they want, this left brain thing. There's a lot of excuses about, Rhiannon, there's the Percy Bysshe Shelley, and I'm going to quote Shelley. But he called artists the unacknowledged legislators of the world. And what that means really is that artists can see the future, a future that they want to live in. And don't we want to hear about that and try to legislate to make that happen? And so I think, whenever we can bring down boundaries. So really, like when you heard me do a speech and when you invited me to make the closing remarks at the Economic Club and then gave me the podium, the goal was to speak a truth I know personally, but also something that I thought would empower other people to speak their truth and speak up. It's a really difficult time to be an artist with social media and, again, comparison. And, they say it's a thief of joy, and I completely agree. And success means what it means to you. And I think that's been a huge lesson that I learn every day of, what did I want to happen and how can I make that happen? And so I think when I started to talk about that and hear from my colleagues that was resonating, that was really validating as well. So that was sort of the activist origin story.
I have to say, like in my former role as the CEO of the Economic Club, I was privy to thousands of conversations and leaders from all around the world speaking and taking the podium, advocating for various issues. And yours is one that stood out to me so deeply, because it wasn't just the storytelling, it wasn't just exactly what you were saying, it was all the good sense making that you were so simply putting out there. And it's interesting that we don't give that opportunity to artists in this. We just don't. It's almost like, your place to speak is in the music. Your place to speak is on the canvas. Your place to make social commentary is through the medium by which you call yourself an artist. But don't step over here into this realm or this side. And that's exactly where conscious economics, again, like one of our 4 pillars of the conscious economy is art. But it's not just art, it's the artist actually being at the table, just like you said, and understanding that if we have a society that is built on the foundation of using our creative life force and honoring the creative life force that we all have, it is a very good indication that that society is healthy and how we value the creative life force. And I mean that in the way that we value it monetarily, the way we value it in the actual social systems and structures. So even in the small example that you said around being at that first boardroom table and saying, hey, if you want to create a music city, artists need to live and they need to be able to, load their gear into a place, and they need to be able to get home on, public transit when a gig's done. And these are like, probably to you, this is like, I'm saying very simple things, but to those, because the representation wasn't in the room, that's profound stuff for people who don't understand that world. So you have opened up a door to something really profoundly big for artists and activists and Canadians, but I think all around the world. And I just want to really honor that. And I think, you simplify it in your mind because it comes naturally to you, but it is a very, very special talent to be able to look at a situation and actually see, oh, this is who we need to write the letter to, and oh, this is the policy or the legislation that needs to change, and you have that mind that sees it that way, and that's not everybody. It really isn't. So it's a very, very special talent.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. That's really kind. I think just, two things I would say. One is even now, because everyone's cause is a little bit different. And again, that's sort of lobbying. You try to make people do things that you want them to do. And it's not always for the reason that you want them to do it. They have their own, you give them another reason. But I do think that at the end of the day, if I'm remembered for anything, or if I could say anything that would be remembered, this is to everyone around the board table or anybody in power and anybody who is a human showing up in this world, because we all have an accountability to make the world around us better, is if about us, not without us. I mean, it's attributed to an old Latin phrase, I believe, but I think every time somebody makes something that's going to affect somebody else, they really have to be there and show up or represented in some way. And so rather than for a cause or, obviously I want fair pay for creators, but that's what I want the most, is that there is a shift in the boardrooms. And I'm so lucky because, again, I've been able to join, a board, the board of Massey Roy Thompson Hall. I've been on it for 7 years. So I've done 2 terms and I've extended 1 term. And on that board, I am the chair of the Nominations and Governance Committee, which is where a lot of the meat happens about getting people on board and having representation and getting a diversity of thought around the table. And I'm so proud to be coming off the board after 7 years, and the board looks so different. And I'm really, really proud of that legacy and what we've done over there. I'm thrilled. But I want to just also acknowledge that I'm disappointed that this is how it had to happen, and I hope that it will change. But in the way of being at that table, at the tables I've been able to be at, and be an artist, but also be listened to, I did have to put on, a costume of sorts, to dress in a certain manner, to look a certain way, get my business blazer on, wear the right shoes. And it goes back to having to confront what their stereotype of an artist was in the way that they wanted to see it. So, the first, I remember being asked, we have morning meetings. Would you be able to make a morning meeting? Thinking that, I don't know what, like I'm up so late doing heroin or smoking opium in my artist den. I don't know. I mean, I'm making fun. But, I think there's so many stereotypes what artists do and what they're capable of or what they're willing to do. And I think that's one part infantilization, but also another part sort of putting artists on a pedestal of, well, they wouldn't want to be involved in the mundane matters of governance. But I did have to sort of camouflage myself in order to challenge their ideas of what an artist was. And hopefully that will lead us a little closer together, where then maybe I can be a little more myself in those situations and still be valued for my opinion on governance. But, I do recognize that not everybody wants to put on a quote unquote, business casual costume and do that. And so I do see that is a barrier to entry for some artists, but I'm hopeful that people can come as you are.
And I think that, again, slowly but surely we will get there. And I felt the very same thing. Like I was full on putting on a costume, in my role at the Economic Club, to the point that literally I had fake glasses made for myself. Like I went and got glasses, non-prescription, and wore them like a security blanket for years, trying to literally disguise myself, make myself look older. And, it's unfortunate that I felt that I had to do that at that point, but I did. It was like my superwoman cape that I put on those fake glasses. Like it gave me that little bit of extra courage to sit at those tables at that time and to try and fit in.
And what did it do for you, like over time? Did that erode your sense of self?
It did, because I was trying to, and it's really interesting, like I took over and I was in my sort of mid to late 20s, and all of my colleagues were, 3 decades older than me. And I was generally one of the only women at all in the room on Bay Street and all of it. And I often would have people ask me even what my day job, they'd say like, what is your job? And I was like, well, this is my job. And because they thought I was just someone who was hired like a Vanna White type to sort of just come and say something nice about the executives and like eat a piece of chicken and leave. And I was like, oh, I'm actually planning and running the whole national strategy for this organization. And I employ people and but it was like I had to keep kind of telling people that that was what I did. And what I finally realized in posturing and putting on the fake glasses and trying to make myself somebody that I wasn't is that I was incredibly uncomfortable. And it didn't change if someone liked me more or not. I was being dismissed regardless. So I got finally to this point where I was like, can I just be myself? And can I experiment with that and see if I'm dismissed in the same? And sometimes I just was. And then sometimes I wasn't, because I wasn't allowing myself to be anymore. Because when those questions would be asked, I would have rather than cowering and being like, oh God, I don't belong here, I would tell them what I did, And so there was a maturing. I became a woman, through that role. From when I started to when I left, I had become a different version of myself. And through all the gnarly comments and all the weird things, I slowly but surely became stronger in knowing what I was about and who I was. But the coming back to myself again now and presenting the way I do publicly now, because I've always been someone, like I'm wearing feather earrings here, but that's more me than wearing a pearl necklace. This is much more my true essence of who I am. So that's been an interesting process to start showing up to spaces more myself and see how people will take you in. And I did an experiment during the pandemic. I was doing a lot of national news. And so they would ask me, to comment on certain things in the economy and women and all of these things. And I was wearing my hats. I love my big hats, and I was wearing them. And the news wouldn't run the segments where I was wearing the hats. And if I took the hat off saying the exact same thing, they'd run the segment. So it was just fascinating. And quite honestly, if you are in a corporate setting that's not a creative space, like if a very more standard business setting and you come in wearing a hat, people will think you've lost your actual mind. That literally, like, something's wrong with you. That's what happened. So I understand, how calculated you do have to be sometimes in these boardrooms or whatever else, which is why we don't have the diversity and representation, because not everybody's willing to do that, like you said, to get there. And unfortunately, there's so much bias that's still steeped and baked in that you will be treated differently based on literally a hat. Like somehow a hat means you've lost your mind. Like that's what I interpreted. And I was like, so be it. Maybe I have lost my mind. Like, you want to hear what's on my mind? Anyway, that's a huge digression, but I want to get back into a space that I know it's a tender space to talk about for all of us, and that is the space of motherhood. And you and I have had some conversations offside, and again, you've talked really passionately about things we could do to advocate for mothers and music workers who are mothers on the road, and just more area for policy change and for changing the mindset. And so you and I have had some conversations there. I would love to get just your heartfelt experience around the idea or concept of mothering projects or anything into the world is mothering, which, that the archetypal mother is mothering and bringing and manifesting things into the world, which you do all the time. And then there's the more traditional sense of thinking about motherhood. And I just think music and motherhood, there's a lot to say here. So I wonder what you want to share.
Oh, thank you. That I have a lot of thoughts on this. And again, like everything that's meaningful, there are facts and there are feelings and they're connected. One of the things I love about yoga, going to my yoga classes, I have a very favorite yoga instructor. And at the beginning of every class, she says, you don't know what's going on in everyone else's life around you, and it can change on a dime. And it's a great reminder that we don't know. And motherhood's one of those things that is an invisible thing in a lot of cases. So, we'll get into the unseen and unpaid work of a mother, but just looking around at my friends and my friends' experiences, and I'm not just talking about artist friends, musician friends, but all my girlfriends, it's such a tender subject because you don't know if someone's been pregnant. You don't know if they've had fertility issues, if they've had miscarriages. And so it's not what you see is what you get kind of thing. Yeah. If someone has been pregnant and you don't see a child, there has probably been a very, very significant personal reason for a number of things. And there's just such a stigma about talking about a lot of that stuff. And, I had the revelations opening up about some of my thoughts and my experiences of some of my closest friends saying that they had the same experience, and how I didn't know that and how they didn't know that is, I don't think it's revelatory because I think we all suspect, but it was a real indication that, wow, we still don't feel good about talking about these things with each other and aloud, and for fear of judgment and stigma and shame. And, for me, in my 20s and 30s, in different relationships and in my career as well, I just didn't see any role models of people in my job on the road having a child, being able to come on the road with a child. I was in bands with a lot of guys who would leave their wives and their kids behind and get on the bus, and have a nice time. I mean, I'm not saying that the road is easy. It is not easy. And it's a job, and it's a 24-hour job too. It's not just the 2 hours you see somebody on stage, and it's really taxing. But if I thought, well, what if I showed up with a baby? Would I be able to come in the tour bus or in the best case scenario, tour bus, but, generally like a tour van. And, I didn't see anybody who was doing that. So I think part of me really just shut that door and said, oh, I guess this isn't for me. This is not going to be my journey. And I don't want to do it on my own. That looks impossible. And one of the great things, and I'm so excited, I saw a great friend last night. She's from Vancouver, but she was in town doing a show. She's a new mom. Her kid's a year old. And she's been able to see other people, manage this. The Good Lovelies are a good example of mothers on the road. And it's not what I saw. There are more role models for this. And I think, again, to the policy question, I think that's going to have to start changing. Some venues have age limits. You couldn't even bring a kid in. And then sometimes they don't even have locks on the bathroom doors, let alone a changing area. That's changing. When we did the refurbishment of Massey Hall, that was something I wanted to be really clear about, that you need a changing table in the dressing room. These are things that somebody wouldn't have thought about that if they hadn't been in that situation. And I think also for the funding bodies to really start looking at how can we support mothers on the road. Why aren't caregivers eligible expenses in some of these funding models? And I think they are. I look at someone like Anna Ruddick making amazing waves in her advocacy for motherhood and being a professional musician. And I just have, hats off. I just have chapeau for her and, everybody who's blazing away for this. But the other thing I think is interesting is that there is a capitalist reason to do a child care, because in fact it can be quite profitable. And so I also sort of, I'm putting it out there. I who knows? Maybe you and I will take this on one day. But there is a real need and desire for better childcare and for a daycare, for a center somewhere, say Liberty Village, where a lot of music industry stuff happens. Patagonia, the outerwear company, has proved that this can be very profitable, and it can actually make not only a profit itself, but also help the companies themselves retain workers. And this is not just women, it's also men. And promote and then allow flexibility. I don't know if you've read Carolyn Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women, but it is so good. And it's also infuriating. I mean, it's so good because you see all of these situations where things have been forgotten about. So I think on that side, like the actual being a mom, and I'd love to see more change, and I'm here. So if anybody wants any help or connections or just another voice, and I'm not a mother in the physical realm, but it's something that I care deeply about because it's a big lifter of all boats when we support our women, when we support our mothers.
Yes. Yeah. I feel that so deeply, and everything that you say resonates so deeply. So many things to think about there in what you just shared. Yes, shout out to Anna as well. Just love the work that she's doing, and it is amazing to see these examples. And it's interesting. And again, I think this is just something, while we're on the topic, just putting it out there to folks, like, be careful what you ask people and what you say to people. I even when I reflect back on being pregnant in my role at the Economic Club, and some of the things that were said and some of the things that were asked, and it was, I just remember, certain moments of having to do everything I could not to just like break out in tears, in the middle of a space because of someone's comment. And I don't mean that they were trying to be malicious. Like, I don't think that was the intention, but there was just many, many experiences and difficult ones. And for me, and Anna and I have spoken about this because, again, I was on the road a lot and having to leave, and I didn't take full maternity leaves. I took maybe 2 months with the first and then went back again around 2 months after with the second. And I missed very valuable time with my children. And I felt that I had to do that in order to keep things going. And I told myself that it was the only way. And I was not able to, because of my nervous system being so jacked up on events and this and all the pressures. I wasn't able to attune properly. I wasn't able to nurse for as long as I wanted to. I got terrible mastitis trying to pump and do and whatever. And ultimately, what I ended up absorbing or swallowing is that I was a bad mother, or that I wasn't really a real mother. And it took me not until really the pandemic and unwinding and coming in, finding my stride in my motherhood. And to me, motherhood to me, and I think we can all exercise motherhood, whatever gender or identity we have, motherhood to me is really about unconditional presence for something or someone, whether it be, the project that you're working on, or the little being that you're helping to raise, or, a family member or whatever. It's that mothering is that unconditional presence that we can give. That's the gift of motherhood. And it's not something that many of us, even the ones that have been mothers in the physical realm, get to experience because of this system and this economy and all of it. So I, equally stand by your side in wanting to advocate. And many of us, whether we've had the experience or haven't, or had losses or whatever those may be, there's still a lot of stigma that needs to be sort of aired out and pulled out. And yeah, I thank you for your work and for being open to talking about that.
I love what you say about being careful about what you say, because, there's also choice. I was at a business dinner, and, people were just making chit chat. Oh, do you have children? And I said no. And somebody asked me if it was by choice. And I thought we were sort of done that. I thought that was another century ago where you felt like that was permissible to say. And, and again, with grace, I know that this person did not mean this in any way maliciously. There was just no place that was coming from that was trying to be in any way confronting. But I think what she really wanted was just to have a conversation about why she had chosen not to. And so she, so she said that. But I do think, again, there's stigma for a reason. I understand, but I don't think it means we can't talk about it. I just think there has to be care and grace given on both
100%.
sides.
100%. And I do find a lot of the times when people are asking a specific question, it's because they have something to share. And it's really interesting how now I'm trying to get into a practice. If something comes up, I say, oh, do you have an experience? Or just trying to flip it back over. Because a lot of the times people actually want to share something, and they're sensing that you're, a safe person to talk about something sensitive to, but they're doing it by asking us if, and it is a strange way to start the conversation. And the stories that I could share of just experiences that I've had, including like being asked when I'm due when I wasn't pregnant. Like, I've had those things too. I will tell you, nothing's going to send you over the edge like that. I will say. So watch what you ask. And I would be very sure before I ask anything to anyone at this point, because I've, humbly had all the experiences myself. So yes.
But you say you're talking about creating space for people. Like, I love that. I'm sorry, I keep elongating an answer. But you're saying this flip that you're doing, because that's an emotionally intelligent thing to do, that you just said that this is something you've thought about, and this is something that you're changing a practice in order to make people more comfortable. That's such a mother thing to do. And when you were talking about, the mothering aspect of art, one of the things I've seen a lot in theater and in music is that there's this sort of very traditional model, which is quite masculine, of this sort of dictatorial, you do this and then I'm going to do this and then this is how you do that and you go over there, and it's this real creating with that one kind of triangle with the person at the top of the triangle kind of sending down what's going to happen. And then I see this really matronly, really mothering style. My friend and colleague Patricia O'Callaghan, who I'm also a huge fan of, she's so good at this. And what it is creating this amazing safe space and then using kind of unseen fingers to shape it through other people's contributions, and then giving people autonomy, giving them space that they can make decisions, suggestions, bring in their own personality. And often this style doesn't get recognized in the same way because people want to name who is the genius behind this. But I do love that style of the safe space that really makes these collectives work. And, for me personally, the most rewarding things have been collectives.
Yeah, I love that too. It's a big, part of our framework and philosophy of the work that we do at Conscious Economics. And even like right now with everything happening in the world, like I find people, they ask you your opinion because they're deeply wanting to share theirs. Like they just deeply want to share theirs. And so unless I truly have something, I'm often just, and again, in being in community spaces so much, I'm just offering that open, like, please share like what you have to say. And it just gives people that freedom. And then we kind of take that energy of turning something onto someone when maybe you're not ready for that, or that's not something you want to go to, but not taking offense, like realizing that that's the way that we as humans sometimes are trying to bring something up. And speaking of, I can't remember the author right now, but there's an incredible book that's From Maiden to Mother, it's called. And it is a fascinating exploration of how we have really, for women, we've idolized the maiden stage, and we have really discredited the mother and like the mother archetype. So when we think of mother, we don't think of this empowered, leader, like the way you're describing your colleague and how she's creating this incredible co-creation space using these motherly, archetypes or energies. And then also just the crone phase and how we have not, honored the crone. And for me, like, I realized in reading this incredible book that I myself was stuck in this maiden, even though I was mother to 2 children on Earthside here, I was a maiden still in my mothering. I didn't know how to fully embody the real archetypal mother. And when I think of the great archetypal mother, like the great mother, which we all crave, we all want this, and we put this pressure on our own mothers or mothers in society to hold that. But really it's this archetype of this great mother that we're really craving in society. And that great mother, when I tap into that energy, the mother loves all her children. Like there's no child that she does not love, even the ones that are quote unquote bad or did something, because she understands that that's just places where more love needs to get in. And so again, I try to look at the world right now, and this really segues into how I'd love to end off our conversation. I look at the world right now, and I look at all of what is coming up and the systems that are collapsing and the truth that is being revealed. And that's how I see it. It's truth that is being revealed, and it's incredibly hard to look at and see. And there's so much pain and suffering, and we are in a death process right now. And I mean that in the, death and rebirth process. We're in a death. We're in a death of an old system, an old economy, an old way of shoving it under the rug, because a lot of it's always been there, but it's coming up more visible and bubbling up more than we would like to see. And that's really what I want to be careful of how I say it, because, when we think about the foundations of our economy and the military industrial complex and the patriarchy and, colonization and slavery and all of these very big themes that feel too big to even tackle or fully understand. We see a world and a body politic becoming very overwhelmed by all of it. And what I try to do is go back into that archetypal great mother and ask, like, what would the great mother archetype do now? Like, what does our mother, our planet, Gaia, Pachamama, Mother Earth, what does she want for us right now as her children? Which she could flick us off her at any moment if she wanted, but she endures and holds us on and, feeds us and nourishes us despite all that we do to, harm and hurt, her and the planet. And so these are overwhelming times. And I know I see you as, a visionary, as a creative, as someone who is a problem solver. And so I wonder, how are you digesting this moment on the planet right now? And what is the call inside of you? How are you feeling you want to take it in, respond? I don't know, but it's a big question, but I wonder how you're doing with it.
Yeah, it's such a big question, but I think you're exactly right. There's so much going on. So rather than feeling helpless, what can we do? And where I'm going is, through reading, through art, through friends, through nature, is trying to be as present as possible, because that's the only way that I can make any difference. And I don't think it helps anybody if I'm racing around again, like on doing the city driving, if I can just be very present. I think it's really profoundly strange that we've just gone through this period of loss of connection, of loss of human interaction. And we all thought, oh, I really want to hug somebody. I just want to listen to live music. I want to hold someone's hand. And we've come out of this and then raced towards this devastating loss of life. And I'm not laughing. It's just so incongruous. And this race towards AI. And I think that's such a manifestation of what's wrong. I think it's the symptoms of what's wrong, and it's this not being aligned. And so, again, this is a practice, which means it's not perfect, but you try to do it as much as you can. I've been going back to The Artist's Way, which is by Julia Cameron's fabulous book. Yes. And, she's got these non-negotiables. It's profoundly changed my life. And one of the non-negotiables is writing every day. So you do your morning pages. You probably know this. You've probably done it all. And then the second one is having an artist date, which is once a week, which is sort of taking yourself for a walk. And I think this is also, it's a lot harder for people who have other obligations in their lives, like children. And so I feel very, very fortunate to be able to have the luxury of time. But if anything that this time, and again, look, terrible things have happened. All you have to do is read the Carl Sagan Pale Blue Dot beautiful paragraph to remind yourself that terrible things have happened all through history. Yeah. And we've mainly done them. But we have to remind ourselves too that we're seeing everything so much more real time everywhere surrounding us with all these feeds. But I'd say the one good thing about seeing this stuff is a reminder, and using it as a reminder and a call that we have a limited time on Earth and we have limited energy. So this year has been a real divesting for me, a divesting year. And I've really looked at a lot of things in my life, like where is my time and energy going? And that is organizations, that is, different projects, friends. I've taken a look. I read this beautiful book called Friendaholic by Elizabeth Day, and it talks a lot about female friendship, which, funny enough, there isn't a lot of writing about, in a scientific way. And this has been sort of a year where I'm going to let some things go and make room for other things. And so I think those two pieces, trying to be very present, and then also just trying to take stock a little bit and make way for the things that I can help with and the things that I want to help with. And again, that where can my energy best be served? Me and others. And again, I'm not perfect. I sound like some sort of guru, but I'm really not. I'm just trying to practice what I preach as much as I possibly can, and to show up. I want to show up.
I think that's beautiful, grounded advice. And again, like today, I try to get out in nature at least once a day, even for a bit, just to ground, just to connect. And, when my nervous system feels overwhelmed, which it does often with all that's going on. And yeah, and like my heart's open. I'm living my life with my heart open, which is, there's a dangerous feeling in doing that because, lots gets in. And I, even today, I reflect like walking down the road. And if I walk slow enough and I'm careful enough on a damp day, then I'm not crushing the snails that are on the sidewalk and their little antennas coming out and just like zeroing in on this little tiny snail and how perfect it is and how it's just going to where it needs to go. And it's in those little moments of actually going down, down, down into the micro and into the present that we ground ourselves and anchor ourselves in this limited time that we are here. And one of my practices that I use, because we are in these prolific, profound, it's like almost like prophecy times is what it feels like in a lot of ways, with just everything unfolding the way it is. And so as we're here, and like, again, I've spent so much of my career working with Indigenous communities and Indigenous elders and like really understanding the prophecy of the eagle and the condor and all of these incredible stories that paint a picture of a time in our world when the answer is actually unity. The answer is that all tribes from all places in the planet have to come together. So if I think of this life and this world as this epic story, the greatest story that was ever created, and in the end, I remind myself always, and it's a love story. It's a love story. Mm-hmm. And so in this time where it's just so almost unbearable to witness the suffering and the pain, I remind myself that I'm in a love story. And if I was on my deathbed as an old crone, which I hope I get that joy and pleasure to be, and I was reading my life story back, what in this particular chapter, what do I want to read that I did, or the outlook that I decided to take? Or, when we read back of the greats, of the Gandhis, of the Nelson Mandelas, of their stories, it's because they lived believing something, even if it wasn't reflected in what was there in the time that they stood. And so that is our call right now, to write our own individual stories of how we stand through this time with honor, with eyes open, with understanding all the very real that there is, but also holding this love. And if we could tap into it, even if it's just in the snail that's on the ground, there's something there. And it's really magical and exciting to think about it that way. So thank you for that reminder. And thank you just for your time. I've taken more of it than I intended, and I could talk to you forever, Miranda. I'm so honored to have you in my life.
No, I
honestly.
feel the same way.
I really am. It's just like, it's the most fun ever. Every time I have you on my schedule, like even a meeting, I'm like, ooh, that's fun.
Well, that's the point, right? This is the future I want to live in. More Rhiannon. Thank you.
More Miranda. That's my future. One question that I would love to ask you is really about your relationship to money, because I know that we've done a lot of work through Conscious Economics, through Lunar Club and mindfulness and money programs to support artists in kind of changing that narrative. And you have this most powerful story, and you did change the narrative for yourself, like energetically, and then from the subconscious to actual where you are now as a homeowner and everything else. So could you just share a little bit about what that process was really like for you and how you got to where you are now?
I would love to. Conscious economics was a big part of it for me. So I was doing therapy about a number of things, and money kept coming up, and my therapist gave me this recommendation to check out this slim volume. It's called The Mother Book, and it's written by an Indian philosopher, Sri Aurobindo, from the turn of last century, and his colleague and compatriot Mira Alfonso, who was the mother, Alfonso. Yeah, and now chapter 4 is all about money. So I'd gone through it. I went through the Mother Book, and again, it's a dense read, but it's really profound. And the chapter 4 was about money and about what money is in service of, and in service of the mother, and in service. It's this. You're a steward of it in your lifetime. It's not, you can't hoard. And then I was talking to Asil, and she asked, how do your parents feel about money, and how do you feel about, and just having those really deep questions. And I started to, through both of those facets, understand that I had this internalized shame about money and being a freelance worker. And that went through being like having crazy banking experience where I couldn't get my check cash because I don't get the same check all the time, and dressing up in a certain way so that I could hopefully not have a hold for 2 weeks on this check I needed for my rent, and my credit score being awful, and the cycle of what that looks like. The worse it is, then the worse it's going to get. I mean, it's just hard to get out of that spiral. And in the freelance economy, you always have 100, but you never have 1,000. And then also just the other weird part about being a musician, where what is my value? Some gigs pay this and some can't pay this. And I don't, it was really, I had a really hard time. So when Asil was asking me these beautiful, like, open questions and providing space for me to think about them and not just hide them under the bed, that really gave me the courage to face what I hadn't been facing, which was, why is my credit score so bad? I just chalked it up to, I'm a musician, and feast or famine. I come off this is, and I just accepted it, and then and then hidden underneath a profound level of shame. And finally, like through that session with her, I ended up contacting a credit counselor. And went through this process where they ask you, do you buy Starbucks every day? But we went through everything, and they said, I don't see the problem. Let's just pull up your credit history. And it's something I'd been too scared to ever do, because of course I had not been a perfect credit citizen, shall we say, in 20 years.
I understand.
And, again, mistakes breed other mistakes, and then you get stuck. But I thought I'd been kind of doing well, but I, still, again, shame, denial. And this gentleman said, I see nothing here except for this credit card that you took out, 3 years ago through Capital One and defaulted. And I said, well, I never did that. And then we investigated, and it turned out that somebody had stolen, had fraudulently taken out a credit card in my name with a completely different address and number. So, of course, I never got any statements or anything. And that's what had ruined my credit.
Wow.
So in the end, it wasn't even me. I mean,
I mean,
I certainly had not done great for a number of years, but I'd just been sitting on this terrible feeling for years. The best part about it, though, was that the day I discovered this fraud was the first day I could start doing something about it. And so I ended up contacting the 2 credit bureaus and learning a lot about credit bureaus and the bureaucracy there. And we can, that's a whole other.
That's a whole
what
other.
What can we do about this chapter? Haha. But what it really was, okay, look, take the flashlight, shine it under the bed. Whatever happens, and it's probably not as bad as you think, as soon as you know what happens, that's the first day you can start doing something about it. And that literally changed my life. So, thanks to your wonderful financial counselor, because who knew that it was just unpacking those feelings that was in the way of those tough questions, and something that wasn't even my fault in the end.
Wow. That is, I mean, when you told us that story, it's an incredible story, and it's so true. And that's so true in all things in our life. The things we don't want to look at, or the things we're afraid to look at, are often the most rewarding things to look at. I write a lot of poems, and I've been writing songs again, and a lot of them reference like skeletons in the closet. It's a big theme of my life, and I've had many. And I had this one lyric where it's like the skeletons are knocking on the door of the bedroom in your closet, and it's this really creepy, eerie feeling. And that's sort of how I lived my life, like always tucking in all these uncomfortable things. And that's really the root of, anxiety and depression and everything. It really is just not wanting to face the thing. But when you face the skeleton, you realize it wasn't a skeleton after all. It was just a sweater that was funnily positioned, and you fold it up and clean it out, and and all of a sudden you're operating with this freedom. And I know you're a homeowner, and again, like, I think it's such a beautiful thing to hear and know, because in these times where it feels like none of us are going to be able to be owning any homes and all of the things, it's like you've done that, and you did that work, and you figured out what that funny feeling was, and you took action. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Well, thanks for giving me space. And I should say there's also just extreme privilege in being able to have that and have the opportunity to have a family who will support that too. I mean, it wouldn't be without my parents' help. And that's, I'm not ashamed to admit that. I'm really proud, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful.
I love it. So just lastly, where can we find you? Where can we check out your latest solo project and all of the great stuff that you're doing?
Yeah, probably the best place is just mirandamulholland.ca, Mulholland like the drive. And yeah, I'm hoping that I'll have lots of things. This time is a fertile time, if nothing else, for creating that legislation for the future as far as being an artist and creating and dreaming up what I want to see. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. What a breath of fresh air. I love you, Miranda, if you're listening. And all of you, thank you for listening to the end of this incredible conversation. So much that I take away from this beautiful conversation that we had. And I hope you did too. And I hope you feel inspired to live your life, to carve out your own path, and to really be able to reflect back and read the chapters of your story and know what you did in order to lead the world through this really challenging transition into what will be eventually that new conscious economy. So Miranda dropped so many incredible resources throughout the episode, including some great books to check out. I know I'll be checking some out. If you want to check her out again, go to her website, Miranda Mulholland. She's also on social media, so if you want to follow there, and we'll link all of that as we put this episode out. So thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again in a couple of weeks, and stay safe and grounded and well. Thank you.